I had directed in the theater in 59, 60, and then in the early 60s directed in the theater in New York and acted. I'd been writing for Esquire for a few years. And in 64, I moved to California to get into pictures. I accidentally met Roger Corman in a movie theater. He'd read my stuff in Esquire, thought of me as a writer. Asked me if I wanted to work with him as an assistant on a picture he was preparing called The Wild Angels. And I worked with him for 22 weeks. So Roger, I think, felt I'd made some contribution and offered me the opportunity to make my own film. He called me one day, said, "Would you like to make your own film?" I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Okay, here's the situation. Boris Karloff owes me 2 days' work. Now, what I'd like you to do is shoot about 20 minutes with Boris Karloff in those 2 days. You can shoot 20 minutes in 2 days. I've shot whole pictures in 2 days. And then what I want you to do is I want you to get some other actors together and shoot for a week or two, say another hour or something. And then I want you to take 20 minutes of Karloff footage from a picture I made called The Terror. So I'll have 20 minutes that you shoot with Karloff, 20 minutes of The Terror, that's 40 minutes, and then you add another 40 minutes with some other actors, and that'll be a new 80-minute Karloff picture. Will you do it?" I said, "Okay." And financially, it was no great deal, but it was a thrill to get the offer. And my wife could work on it with me, Polly Platt. So Polly and I spent a long time trying to figure out what we were going to do. We saw The Terror, and we couldn't figure out how to make Boris Karloff a legitimate heavy in the modern world. And how were we going to use this Victorian horror movie footage? How were we going to do? We couldn't figure out what to do. And in my frustration, I went to a joke. And I thought to myself, okay, I know how to begin the picture. We'll start in a projection room. The Terror will end. And lights will come up, and Boris Karloff will be sitting there. He'll turn to Roger Corman, who'll be sitting there, and he'll say, "Roger, that's the worst movie I've ever seen." And I thought, wait a minute, that's not a bad idea. And coincidentally, some months back, the editor of Esquire, Harold Hayes, had said to me, "Why don't you make a movie about Charles Whitman?" Charles Whitman was a fellow who'd gone to the tower at University of Texas and randomly shot a whole bunch of people before shooting himself. And I thought, if Karloff's in the movie, maybe he could be an actor. And maybe he could be an actor who wants to quit because his kind of horror, this kind of Victorian horror stuff, was pretty old-fashioned compared to somebody who goes to a tower and just randomly picks people up. That was modern horror. And that's how it started. We thought maybe we'd tell 2 stories. And since we only had Karloff for 2 days, we thought, well, that'll make his story shorter and easier to shoot because we can cross-cut between the 2 stories. And that was how it started. Well, Polly and I worked out the story, and then I wrote the screenplay. And then I showed it to a friend of mine who was a veteran director, Samuel Fuller. And in about 2.5 hours, pacing back and forth, he basically rewrote the script, giving me the most extraordinary ideas. I said, "Jesus, Sammy, this is fantastic. I got to give you credit for this." He said, "If you give me credit, they'll think I did the whole thing." I said, "Well, you practically did." He said, No credit, kid, no credit." That's how generous he was. No credit, no money, just a favor.
What a nice boy Sammy is. He's the only one I feel sorry about in all this.
In life, Boris was very much the way we showed him in the movie, only he wasn't bitter and he wasn't about to retire, although he had a brace on each leg, had difficulty walking. You see in one shot, you can see he's got a completely curved leg. He had to have a cane. He had emphysema, so he had trouble breathing. But boy, did he never complain. Never complained.
Mr. Boogeyman, King of Blood, they used to call me. Marx Brothers make you laugh. Garbo makes you weep. Orlock makes you scream.
He was just really such a delightful English gentleman. Very refined, very self-deprecating, very professional.
Oh, I know how people think of me these days. Old-fashioned, outmoded.
Well, not after this picture they wouldn't.
You can't change a whole lifetime with one picture.
What have you got if you quit?
The character I played, Sammy Michaels, is a little tribute to Samuel Fuller, whose name was Samuel Michael Fuller. And so it's just a little inside joke for Sammy. I had written the part of the young director for a friend of mine, George Morfogen, who was a very fine actor. But he was not able to come to Los Angeles at that time. And I just thought, well, I'll just do it myself. And I don't know why I thought I'd do it myself, because I was reticent about casting myself again for about 10 years. I didn't. But seeing it now, it seems not so bad, as I thought it was at the time.
I think I better go home now.
I think you better stay here.
I think I better stay here.
Come on, come on. You'll be more comfortable on the couch. Get up.
It was wonderful to act with Karloff. That was quite a joy to play those scenes with him, and he was very encouraging. One time he directed me, because he said, it was funny, we had this scene where we're both on the bed together, and then we wake up in the morning. It was written in the script. He wakes up, turns, sees Byron Orlock, Boris Karloff, is shocked, and then starts to laugh. So I said action, and we tried to do the thing, and it's very hard to laugh on cue, very tough. And I did it 2 or 3 times, and I kept screwing it up. I said, that's no good. And Boris finally turns to me slightly exasperated. He says, you know, just because you wrote it in the script that the character laughs doesn't mean you have to do it. I mean, you wrote it. You can also ignore it. I said, okay, thanks for the direction. And I did ignore it, and I just played like I was shocked. And we got it rather quickly.
Huh? Have you gone mad?
And then Boris added the joke when he sees himself in the mirror.
Oh.
Does a take on himself, which was very funny. Well, the murder sequence when he kills the wife and then the mother and then the delivery boy is based, the whole sequence was based largely on what Charles Whitman did. He killed his wife, his mother, and so on. And then after killing them, he sort of buried them by putting them neatly into bed, covered them up. Horrible. And we just took it from that situation. It was actually shot in many little pieces, particularly the shooting of the wife, which is very shocking. And we did it very montage-oriented, where each piece doesn't have any meaning unless it's put with the other piece.
Aren't you going to go to work?
We shot all that in a little studio. And all the sets were basically the same sets, repainted, and walls moved around. Polly designed it so that we could use the same flats and repaint them and redress them and so on. And that was the beginning of the horror sequences. We shot on the freeway, and we looked into it, and you're not allowed to shoot on the freeway at all. On the freeway, at the freeway, near the freeway, anything. Well, you know, the thing I'd learned through Roger Corman was you don't pay attention to rules if you're going to shoot guerrilla warfare kind of filmmaking, and so we didn't pay any attention to the rules. And we shot on the freeway, at the freeway, and staged scenes on the freeway. And I don't know how we got away with it. The whole freeway sequence, everything, him arriving, the shootings, all that was done in 2 days. And every bit of it was done silent. We tried to save money, so we didn't have any sound. And Verna Fields, who was a sound editor then, this is before she became a film editor, she put in all that sound. Everything in the freeway sequence was shot silent, and she put it in later. She had, I think, 28 to 30 tracks running at the same time. It was quite an elaborate job she did. I listened to Sammy Fuller, who said, save your money for the finish, kid. So we saved our money for the finish. And the last sequence, which runs about 20 minutes, was all shot in 12 days. It was quite elaborate. And we shot some test footage with no lighting before at the same drive-in, in the refreshment stand, around the ticket booth, people leaving and coming and going. And we threw it all in. We used it all, every second we had. And it was shot in a real projection booth. That was the real projectionist, whose name happened to be Byron, which is weird. And we didn't have that many extras. We didn't have that many cars. We just had to make it look like we did. We shot all that over a period of 12 long nights. And we only had Boris at the drive-in one night. We shot everything with him in one night.
Take care of her. Mr. Orlock!
We finished the picture, and we thought it was pretty good, but Roger had a deal with American International Pictures, AIP. He distributed most of his films through, but I was hoping that maybe I could get a major studio. So I said to Roger, I'd really like to see if we could sell this somewhere else. He said, go ahead, if you can, fine, I just want my money back. He had spent about $125,000. So I was friendly with Jerry Lewis. And Jerry Lewis's secretary, his assistant, was a woman named Carol Saraceno. And now she was no longer working for Jerry, she was working for Robert Evans, who was the head of Paramount. So I said to Carol, do you think you can get Bob Evans to see Targets? She'd seen it. She said, well, I'll give it a shot. Sure enough, a few weeks later, she got him to see it. And I get a call from Robert Evans, calls me up and says, well, you ruined my evening last night. And I didn't know this man. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, Carol asked me to see this picture called Targets, and I said, oh, I'll look at a couple of reels, and I started to run it, and I couldn't stop. He's a hell of a picture. We want to buy it. So he sent it to Charles Bludorn in New York, who was the head of Gulf and Western, who owned Paramount, and he said, well, let's buy it. But his associate hated the picture, didn't want to buy it, so they didn't buy it. Next thing that happened was Arthur Knight was a film scholar and teacher at USC, and he invited me to show the film at his class. I knew the fellows that wrote reviews for the Daily Variety and for the Reporter, so I called the two critics and I said, fellas, Arthur Knight's going to show my movie at his class. Would you come down, see it? And if you like it, would you write about it? And if you don't like it, would you not write about it? And they said, all right. So they came down, and they luckily both liked it. They reviewed it as a film without a distributor in the trades. Bob Evans saw the review, circled it, sent it to Charlie Bludorn saying, I think we were right, and then they did buy it. Paramount bought the picture after all for $150,000, so Roger made a $25,000 profit. And then two tragedies happened before the picture was scheduled for release. Martin Luther King was murdered, and Bobby Kennedy was murdered. And suddenly there was a big hue and cry against violence in movies, and we had a pretty violent movie. So half the studio said, let's never release this picture. And the other half said, let's release it right away. So they compromised, and they decided to release it in August of that year. Then it was shown very limited release.
Harry! What are you doing?
How's your dad?
It's okay.
Here you go. Thanks a lot. What you hunting this time?
Gonna shoot some pigs.
Good luck.
Didn't do any business. Got good reviews, some very good reviews. New York Times was extremely good. And it established me, even though it didn't do any business. The people who produced Easy Rider, ironically, saw the picture, and they got in touch with me and said, anything I ever want to make, I should come to them first. And I eventually came to them with a book called The Last Picture Show, and they made it. It wouldn't have happened without Targets, which wouldn't have happened without Roger, which wouldn't have happened without Karloff. And so that's how it goes in the movie business. One thing leads to another.